and to turn to the Soviets. Now, the Soviets, in turn, we're not going to do this for nothing. If we're going to be protecting Cuba, there must be some advantage to us. So that led Khrushchev to think of placing missiles in Cuba. And they did, leading us to the missile crisis. I would say the deadliest moment in the Cold War. Thank goodness Kennedy and Khrushchev were sensible, reached an agreement, and the missile crisis was behind us. You would have thought with the missile crisis, any chance of U.S.-Cuban détente would be ended. No, really, Castro was furious at the Soviets for what he saw as betraying him. They had negotiated with the U.S. behind his back, had reached an agreement that he didn't even know about, and he was furious. He actually indicated to Kennedy that he was open to dialogue. And Kennedy responded and sent, at a given point, sent Jean Daniel, a French newsman, to talk to Castro. Jean Daniel reported that Castro was enthusiastic, open to dialogue, wanted to talk. But the second day that Jean Daniel met with Castro, word came Kennedy had been assassinated. And as Castro said, that is the end of that. And indeed it was. We then had LBJ and Nixon, of course, and no chance at all of dialogue, no chance at all of improving relations with Cuba. Not until Jimmy Carter. I came in, I was brought back, I was with the first group of diplomats back into Cuba as Carter had the opening to the island, and I then became Director of Cuban Affairs in the Department of State. It was very disappointing. We began hopefully, and I think there was a good chance that we might have muted the worst of the tensions. We might have even reached some agreements, but there were disagreements within the Carter administration. I can go into those later if you wish, but I won't take the time to do it now. But let's just say the dialogue with Cuba under the Carter administration really broke down, initially at least, because of disagreements within the Carter administration itself. And then, of course, I became chief of the U.S. intersection under the Carter administration. I was there from '79 till '82. Some very exciting days. But then in came Reagan, of course. And I think any chance that, I gave it a year, but reached the conclusion there was really no chance of détente, any chance of meaningful dialogue between the United States and Cuba under the Reagan administration. And so in 1982, I sent in my cable asking to be removed from the post, given a job unrelated to policy until such time as I could take early retirement, and did. We then went through more years of disagreement, inability to talk to one another. Clinton came in, of course, in 1992. For a moment, well, maybe more than a few moments, a few days, had some hope that this would change things. After all, now, 1992, the Cold War was over. The Soviet Union had collapsed. Cuba was no longer trying to overthrow other governments in Latin America. It seemed to me that the conditions were there under which we could really begin to engage, have a dialogue, a meaningful dialogue with Cuba. But to my disappointment, Clinton went down to Miami, had dinner with the Cuban American National Foundation, and came out with a check for $275,000, or however much it was a lot. and said, in effect, that he liked the Cuba policy just the way it was. And so we didn't really have any change, although I will say that in the last 4 years of the Kennedy administration, the Clinton administration, travel increased. They did allow people-to-people travel and so forth. But then, of course, came George Bush, and the worst policy, if you could call it that, we've ever had toward Cuba. It wasn't really even a policy. George Bush came in. Now look, you had 9/11. The Cubans immediately indicated that they were keeping their airspace open to American planes after we closed ours. Anyone trapped in the air could land in Cuba. They signed all 12 UN anti-terrorist resolutions. They indicated a full willingness to negotiate anti-terrorist agreements with the United States and to cooperate with us against terrorist activities in any way that was deemed possible. The Bush administration did not respond to that, except a short time after to say that the objective of the Bush administration was to bring down the Castro government and the entire apparatus that had supported it through the years. So we had 8 years under George Bush of unrelenting hostility. We then we come to Barack Obama. As in 1992, I had hoped, I still hope, that the Obama administration will bring change, and it has brought some. They have opened up so that Cuban Americans can again travel and send remittances to their families. They have indicated a willingness to talk about migration issues and so forth. But that's not the crux of the matter. We want to see Cuba, of course, move toward a more open society, to have more respect for human rights and so forth. But you aren't going to bring that about by saying to the Cubans, look, we've raised the controls on Cuban American travel. Now it's up to you. Now it's up to you to change your system, and when you do, then we can take another step. That will never work. What we need to do is to begin a dialogue with the Cubans, begin to reduce tensions between the United States and Cuba. And as we do so, the Cubans, I feel certain, will respond. They have in the past, and I think they would again. But you aren't going to accomplish anything by keeping tensions at a high level and by demanding that they first change their system and then we will take new steps. And moreover, some of the steps we should have taken to begin with. Academic travel. Restrictions on academic travel were imposed by George Bush in 2004. Those should be lifted right away. Restrictions on people-to-people travel. Cuba should not be on the terrorist list. I've been reading that bloody thing for the past 5 years. There's not a shred of evidence that Cuba belongs there. But over the past few years, of course, well, there's no evidence that would place it on the terrorist list, but the Bush administration wants it to be there. Okay, we understand that. But we're not talking about the Bush administration anymore. We're talking about the Obama administration. Now, it's frustrating, but one understands that